Okay, on the dual process theory, people have two systems for thinking. Type 1, the intuitive, it's based on experience. It's the fast thinking. It's also called System 1 thinking. System 2 is the rational analytical. It's the slow thinking. It's also called System 2 thinking. Critical thinkers will often use Type 2, obviously, for important questions. So they take a slower, more deliberate approach to important questions like deciding which theory of learning is the best theory. That's a Type 2 question. They use the standards of evidence to analyze the relative information and evidence and try to draw out that well-reasoned conclusion. Now, Type 1 is positive too, so there are areas that it works well in. For example, things that need to be quick and easy, then go with your gut type of things. As an example, your favorite candy. That's a Type 1 question. You don't really need to get into critical thinking to discover what your favorite type of candy is. You're going to go with your gut on that. Related to this are arguments. Arguments, generally, you would like for them to be Type 2 thinking. You're not just going to go with your gut. You want to rationally and critically think through your arguments. A basic argument is a claim or conclusion taken along with evidence. We go through a few terms here. So a basic argument is a claim or conclusion that's taken along with evidence. So there's two things there, claim and evidence. A claim is a statement asserting that someone or something has a particular characteristic or property. It has a truth value, is how they refer to it. Somewhat related to the claims are opinions. And opinions, though, are not persuasive unless they are supported by evidence. When an issue or a question is important, critical thinkers, they support their opinions with evidence. They make arguments. So, okay, what is evidence? It's a reason offered in support of a claim or a conclusion. Evidence can take on several different forms. You could have facts, examples, consensus of other people, scientific research findings, the statements from authorities. Those are all going to be evidence for your claim/opinion. And so again, when we're talking about critical thinking, being able to understand the logic behind it, being able to identify these different parts of the argument. What's the claim? What's the evidence? Does this satisfy the criteria for being a basic argument? You need to be able to do that to think critically. And so one way you can do this is there are some key words that you might hear for conclusions, for evidence. For example, when you're looking for a conclusion, you might hear words like therefore, in conclusion, consequently, accordingly. Those are all going to indicate that a conclusion is on the way. For finding evidence, you might hear terms like for example, because of, it is known that. And so you can combine those two things and get the argument. If you hear for example, blah, blah, blah. So in conclusion, what they're saying is because of this reason, this is what I think. And that is a basic argument when those two things go together. So just real quick, we'll kind of go through an example here. Is this a basic argument? Cognition refers to the mental processes involved in encoding, storage, retrieval, and the use of information. Furthermore, it involves the processes of attention, perception, learning, and memory. So think about that for a second. Is it a basic argument? There's a lot of big words, so that makes it seem like it's powerful. That's another kind of trick that we pull on ourselves. It has the word furthermore in there. Is that signaling a conclusion? Is it? It turns out it is not. It's actually a set of claims. The first part of the sentence here, that is a claim. The furthermore, and then this is another claim. They're not actually providing any evidence for either one of the claims. So yes, it's not a basic argument because it lacks a reason. It lacks evidence. Furthermore does not signal a conclusion, only that more information is on the way. Okay, related to this, weak and bad arguments. Sometimes basic arguments make claims that are untrue. So you can actually have a true argument, but doesn't necessarily mean it's a good argument because they might have weak or low quality evidence. Even so, they are basic arguments if they have both a claim and a conclusion, and at least one supporting piece of evidence for it. If they have both a claim and supporting evidence for it. As an example, if your friend says, I saw a researcher in a magazine, they said that astrological signs do correlate with a person's personality. So, therefore, I am going to learn a lot about myself by looking at my horoscope. It is a basic argument. There's a claim and the conclusion and the evidence. So his conclusion basically is, I'm going to learn a lot about myself from my horoscope. What's your evidence for that? Well, a researcher said it in a magazine. So it is a basic argument. However, is it a good argument? What is the quality of the evidence? Some researcher in some magazine. That could be the National Enquirer. That could be some staff writer for the National Enquirer. That does not make it is a basic argument. It is not necessarily a compelling argument. And so related to this, if you are listening to what you consider a bad argument, you might come back with a counter argument. This is going to be a claim and evidence supporting the other side of an extended argument. And it takes the form of like a rebuttal, a dialogue. An argument could be the earth is flat. I can see that it continues off into the distance. That's a basic argument. The counter argument is the earth is round. There are satellite photos that shows that it is roughly spherical. That's also a basic argument. And it's a more compelling argument because it has better evidence. An interesting example of this, the counter arguments that the textbook has, is who was the most ruthless dictator? And so a lot of people would say Hitler, because of what he did in World War II, because 6 million Jews died, the Nazi concentration camps. You could make a very strong argument that Hitler was the most ruthless dictator in history. However, a dictator like Stalin did some pretty terrible things too. He murdered as many as 6 million on his own, and through neglect and these starvation camps that he had, a total of 24 million people died under Stalin. So in both those cases, you have strong arguments. You have good evidence. You make a claim. And so, yes, those are a good argument and a good counter argument. And you could even make more than that. One of the things they're saying basically here is that the number of people that died because of their rules is what makes him the most ruthless dictator, but perhaps you would use a different criteria, like we talked about earlier, instead of just the number of people that died, and you might say somebody else is the most ruthless dictator. So that's how an argument, counter-argument would work. All right, you might think a little bit more about those things. On the next slide, we'll get into a little bit more on the thinking errors for Chapter 1.